TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian.
Welcome back, everybody, to TE Talks, sponsored by Through Eternity Tours. I'm your host, Rob Allen, and on TE Talks, we get to talk with some of the most fascinating people who make a living out of being wonderful storytellers. We get to delve into what drives them, what is their passion, what makes them joyful in life. And today, we have a very special, joyful guide, Mario. Mario, how are you?
I'm doing great, Rob. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm going to try to be a little bit more subdued and authentic for you, okay?
Why would you say that? You're always so authentic.
Yeah. If you guys haven't gathered, Mario and I have a very particular friendly relationship, and we joke around a lot. So Mario, why don't you tell everybody, how long have you been working with Through Eternity?
Well, I think that would be 11 years by now.
Oh my God, 11 years. I know that you look like you're about 12. So that means you're a babe in arms. So you were 26, 27 then when you started working with us.
Yes, I was exactly 26. Correct.
Right. And I came into contact with you through Tatiana, who I always consider to be who is your mother-in-law, but she was the very first guide of Through Eternity Tours, and she was our Vatican guide. She was our go-to guide.
Yeah, have you interviewed her? You have interviewed her already for this podcast, haven't you?
Not yet, but I should very well interview her. That would be wonderful to interview her. I would adore it. She's the one that got us into Roamers, I think. She was the one who got us because of her Vatican tour.
And I believe it was Rick Steves who followed her tour. And it's interesting how she really... No, you're not convinced?
I gave Rick Steves a tour.
Well, don't get angry now. Don't get offensive. I wouldn't know. I wasn't there. The interesting thing is that my
if I'm going to be name dropping here. Anyway, you're saying?
Rick Steves, you mean?
Yes.
No, it was my mother-in-law who really made Rome, made us fall in love, like the entire family. She was the first one who started guiding in the family. And when I moved to Italy in 2009, my first son was going to get born. And I didn't know what to do. I worked as an interpreter and a translator for a while. And I made some friends who were guiding as well. And then just one day, it happened that my mother-in-law said, "You should be doing this. This is perfect for you." Mm-hmm. And I remember my first Vatican tour, which was not with you yet. But after having followed so many tours, I followed your tour, and I believe I followed Brandon's and Thomas. Mm-hmm. And then finally, it was my turn. I was terribly nervous. But it was one of the many tours that I've given over the past years.
Well, thinking about it, you're right about Tatiana. She's kind of infectious with her wonderful information that she has. And what's really great about, I've had many an evening passing by her home, which you're familiar with, of course. And then we would also talk about theater because she's pretty passionate about theater. And Tatiana is Russian, who has been living in Rome for many, many years. So yeah, it was a great thing. I'm very thankful for her to have introduced you into the company. It's always been a pleasure. Now, to get onto the subject today, this week we are going to be doing TE destinations. We're covering the area of Monte, and we are going to be showing what you did with Thomas when you guys did TE Walks Live, and that's going to be going up on our YouTube channel. But I was walking around with Thomas, and we were taping Monte, and we went into the church of San Martino e Silvestro ai Monti, which is a wonderful church. Besides having frescoes of what St. Peter's and St. John of Lateran used to look like, they have this wonderful underground area that I had never seen. The priest just said, "Hey, by the way, would you like to check this out?" And so we all went with Dylan, and we filmed this beautiful, I would assume probably 5th century underground area. It was a tomb for the saint. There were 2 different levels. And I just wanted to say, okay, that is a great connection to the underground of Rome. And I thought you would be the perfect person to do the underground subject with us, because you're actually one of the guys who's done it for quite a long time with us.
Well, you're talking about the underground tour that we started St. Clement's, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
because I heard you entered San Martino ai Monti, and I was very envious that Dylan told me you were there with Thomas as well, I believe. I tried getting into that same church a week after, and there was no one to let me walk downstairs. So I was just in front of a shut fence. And so that's where I thought, see, you need Rob to get into places. But it's interesting. Wasn't it also an apartment? Or because you're saying there's a tomb down there?
Oh God,
I don't.
it seemed like there was a level that it could have been an older church and then the tomb below that church, because there were remnants, if I remember correctly, there were remnants of frescoes. And it seemed that at some point something was built up. And what was wonderful about it, and I scared the bejesus out of Thomas, because there was like like this open hole in the wall and it was dark behind it. But I realized that there was a staircase, and I went up there and I waited in secret. And when Thomas came out, I went, boom! And he swore, and that's all on the video, so you can see that happening. But yeah, but aside from that, that's like a bit of a morsel of what there is. And yes, we did the underground Rome tour. We were one of the first companies that would do it. In fact, I think TripAdvisor had an affiliate that said we were the best underground tour in the world. It was one of the best tours to get. And we talked about it. So all these areas that we went to, let's say, because it kind of evolved over the years, but there's this whole aspect of underground Rome. And let's talk about one of my favorite places, and I'm sure you love it too, is San Clemente, like you mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's one of those places where when you start walking around with people in Rome, we all know, of course, that there's more than 3,000 years of history to cover. And yet it's never as tangible as at that place, because when you walk over the Forum, you see all the old ruins, and you walk at St. Peter's, and you're well aware that you're walking around in a 500-600-year-old building and museums. And when you go to St. Clement, you can really see it, the stratification of layers of time where you're really walking through. So as a starting point for studying Rome, I always love to start tours there, because you can give this entire overview of Rome's history and then go and delve into it, literally. So we'd usually start there and start talking about how you can see that the church is already, the entrances are different. They're two separate entrances, one that almost seems to be dug out from the street, right? Where you're entering at the front through the portico, and you see all the different materials that have been used just to mix and match and create an entrance. Then you enter this beautiful courtyard with 2,000-year-old columns and beautiful old mosaics of the Middle Ages. And then you enter the church, and you go slightly further back in time to the 12th century, until you understand that walking down this staircase where they started excavating, was it in the 1850s, I guess, when they started there, when this Irish Dominican monk wanted to dig out this place where they were trying to look for St. Clement's tomb. And they started digging out this. What, come again?
That was old Father Maluli that was in the excavations, the Irish Dominicans that were going on inside that church.
And then, and then when you start walking there, you just feel yourself becoming an archaeologist, where you start looking for little clues, like how can you truly understand what they were looking for? And then you see a column here and a tomb there, and then these beautiful frescoes that Thomas actually gives beautiful explanations about in his medieval tour as well. And that's exactly the point you were making. You can see so many layers of history and everything in one place. So that's beautiful. What I was only made aware of a couple of years ago is that there's another church in Rome that should be exactly the same. So 3 layers, because you have St. Clement's above, then you have the 4th century church, and then the actual excavation of apartments. and this Roman mint. But then there's another church that has a 17th century church on top, apartments on one level, and another level underneath that. But unfortunately, it has never opened up to
Is that
a larger public. It's called the Santa Passera, which is actually close to Monteverde. Or, no, what am I saying? Close to Portuense.
Okay. I've never heard of this. Santa Passera.
Yeah, we should try to get in, I believe. There's one priest keeping the door anxiously locked for tourists. But it would be very interesting to actually get in and see.
Oh, God, yeah. For our listeners, you guys have to imagine, Mario has lived in Rome for over 10 years, and I've lived in Rome for over 20 years. There's always something new to be discovered. I do want to say one thing about San Clemente, and then we're going to get to the question that people ask us. We're going to go on to the underground tour. But I wanted to say I loved the church itself. You're right. It is 3 layers of time. It is a perfect key for people to understand how Rome is made up of different time periods. You can see it all in one. And for me, the church itself happens to be one of the most beautiful churches in Rome, which is not an easy accomplishment by any means. It has some of the most beautiful mosaics of any church, and it also has one of the early Renaissance era frescoes in a chapel, which I think is completely amazing, by Marcellino di Paricale. So, you just walk into this place. And when we would take people, at the time when we started it 20 years ago, not many people even knew of its existence. You'd have mostly German tourists, probably Dutch tourists. If you guys don't know, Mario is Dutch, even though he speaks English perfectly. And we hate him for it. But, it was famous, but not for native English speakers usually, except for maybe the Irish Dominicans who ran the church. You could hear them with their Irish accent when they were giving Mass in Italian, which always was lovely. So let's talk about this. Why underground? Why is a city underground? What does that mean? Why did that happen? What are the reasons as to why Rome has so many underground areas?
Well, it's interesting. We talked about this actually a couple of weeks ago. Thomas was preparing for his medieval tours, and what we usually
virtual tour, you mean, right?
Come again?
His medieval virtual tour.
Yeah, it's his medieval virtual tour, of course. And usually, what we're saying is, of course, Rome suffered all these floods. The Tiber River flooded every year, every 2 years. Large areas of the city were completely covered in water, and slowly as the water flows away, then layers of silt remain and build up over the years. Of course, if you talk about the time of Emperor Augustus 2,000 years ago, that wasn't a problem. He would just say, clean up the streets altogether, in a matter of weeks, we're back to business, which didn't happen, of course, over the Middle Ages, where the number of inhabitants drastically reduces to, I believe some would even say 15 to 25,000 all over the city of Rome. They live very much concentrated in certain areas, and others are completely forgotten. And that's why all these buildings slowly disappear. Then, of course, there are wars and fires, earthquakes, and some of the buildings are purposefully destroyed because they want to either forget about the terrible history that was attached to it, or because they want to repurpose the building. How many times that these beautiful monuments that we could still see in paintings, for instance, in the Sistine Chapel, there are these beautiful paintings done in the 15th century that show us beautiful panoramas of Rome with monuments that no longer exist, because these monuments were repurposed for chapels in churches, for statues, and what more. And so that's why. Come again?
I love talking about those, like the Septizodium and the Botticelli.
Yeah, precisely. Where we can still see today the Arch of Constantine, but the Septizodium completely gone. And I very often imagine, how would it have been if we only had all those monuments still today? So it's a great thing that we still have those paintings, those images. And yet, when you walk around, this was another conversation I had the other day with Luca, our colleague and archaeologist,
Yes.
where he's actually doing lots of excavations recently, which are these emergency excavations. They want to build a big apartment building somewhere in a modern area. They call for archaeologists and they find something amazing, whether it is a part of an aqueduct, an apartment, or whatever. And that happens everywhere you go in Rome.
Yes.
And so that's why it is usually so amazing and surprising that you find an entire city under the city that we already see above ground.
Yeah, it's amazing. That comes to mind when you're saying this, because when we had to take the exam to become official guides, we had to, they basically, and understandably, they require that you know and learn and study everything, even places that you would never really or allowed to take people. And thanks to Francesca, who worked with the company and is also an early Christian archaeologist, who had some connections. So we got to see, because for me, when I was studying, I really wanted to see these places because it just stuck in my mind much more. So it was the underground complex to the Aureliani that was off down Via Labicana. It was incredible. And then, it had the mosaic floors and the people depicted in the mosaics. That was, I believe, 2nd century AD pagan burial area. And it had 3 different complexes. And then when you were talking about with Luca, when they were constructing a building, and I think it was in the 50s or the 60s, they found a hole underground because there are also sinkholes in Rome, just the way the geography is of the area, because it was also volcanic here many years ago. They thought that they found some kind of cavern, and so they kept on pouring cement into the foundation of the building and pouring, like, wait a minute, maybe there's something here. And so they found the complex is, I believe it's still called today, the Dino Compagni complex, and it's actually not far from where our offices used to be. And it's called the Sistine Chapel of Early Christian Fresco Painting. And we got to go, a group of us got to go down, and it was amazing because it's like a manhole cover. It's like this door panel that they just opened up, and we walked down the steps, and the frescoes there were so stunning. They were just amazing. They were just amazing. Everything that we got to see. Sorry, there's an ambulance going by. Frescoes of early saints. I mean, much even more so because of the catacombs that we've all gone to visit. The catacombs themselves were, let's say, constantly visited throughout the centuries, and so they're highly damaged. These weren't at all. They were perfect, so everything was painted. Let's just wait 1 minute. Could you hear that?
A lot, yes.
Yeah, so we'll just
Too
pause
much.
that.
Is it hot in Rome? Did your windows open?
No, but there's a lot of traffic on this road. Dylan loves living here for this reason. Dylan's staying in the office, right?
I know. But it's a great place to live, actually.
I'd say that too. I try to remind him that. But Anyway, getting back to the point. So we go downstairs and see this area that's completely perfect in its condition of the frescoes, as opposed to the catacombs, which are highly damaged because people have been visiting them throughout the centuries. Here is something that was lost and forgotten and completely there for us. And, only certain people are allowed to visit this. It's not open to the public. So one has to imagine when they come to Rome that there are so many different places that are to be seen underground. It's a whole different world.
But not only, when you're mentioning the catacombs,
Yeah.
I always find it beautiful, whatever catacombs we visit. And there's so many of them that are open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we would say, well, you've seen one catacombs, you've seen them all, but that's absolutely not true, because they always have something really special, or a special entrance, or this big crypt in the middle, or beautiful statues, or beautiful frescoes. And so there's always something to see. But it's true, I was last time I was driving around in a golf cart with a small group, and we were going out to the catacombs, and we got there, and the guide really took his time, because when we're at the catacombs, we're not allowed to guide ourselves any longer, right? The Vatican decided that it's much better to have their priests guiding us around.
Yeah, people can get lost in the tunnels, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's better safe than sorry. So
Yeah.
we're down there, and this priest really took his time, and it was magnificent because, of course, there was no one around. This was maybe last year. I think it was in October
Mm-hmm.
that we were there, and it was at the catacombs of Saint Calixtus.
Mm-hmm.
And so you must have been multiple
Yeah,
times.
yeah. It's the hugest, it's the biggest one, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what they said. And at Saint Sebastian, they say that they have the largest. Well, it doesn't really matter. So what happened was that I knew the story of how the catacombs were, how they started excavating them.
Yes.
So you have Antonio Bosio, this archaeologist who's really interested. He knows about the place more or less close to the Appian Way, and there were all these air vents coming out in between the grass, and he just stumbles upon a rock. He stumbles upon on a marble slab with half an inscription, and that's what got him digging. And so I knew that story, but this priest, he really goes all the way, takes us downstairs, and we are, is it the second level down? So there's 4 in total. We're in the second level down. And then he says, oh, wait, have you ever been there? Have you seen the skulls? And I go like, no, I didn't know there were any skulls.
No, you got to see skulls?
Because usually all the bones have been taken away and they put these in these large crypts or memorial, how would you call them? These memorial tombs.
Sure.
And so he says, no. Well, you have to come over, and we're really not allowed to go in here. So he says, just shh. And we walk. Of course, it's pitch black down there. If you've been in the catacombs, you don't see a thing. It's all tufa rock and all these holes in the walls. And there we are. And then he says, okay, so it's actually in this little corridor, but we can't go there because it's all locked up. But if you lean over, so he leans over this fence and he goes, look at that. And then I'll shine by with my light. And he was right. There you have actually the bones that are still there in the catacombs. And you can see from there a long corridor that leads to that first spot where they started digging. And so we were all excited. We were going on, like we were now like real archaeologists discovering this for the first time together with Antonio. But it was really beautiful. And so there's so many different experiences. And then really they come so much alive because this is a priest who started working there only, I believe it was a year ago. And so he was so enthusiastic. And as I visited him in October, I guess maybe 3-4 times, every single time the tour got longer. Like he would say, you're supposed to take us down for half an hour. It became 40 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes, until someone else actually said, look, you can't stay longer down there than an hour and 15 minutes because there's not enough oxygen. And so I think they told him as well. So
I don't know.
One time that we can get.
But that's pretty funny.
I don't know. Apparently, there is some gas that is emitted from the tufa rock. That's not too good.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. Then I'll make sure that you'll be doing the catacombs tour more often than I will.
That's what made my first white hair come out. That's it.
Oh, there we go.
Found it.
Among other things. Wow. So, I mean, that's amazing to see that you're able to go even see the bones, even in some of our spots that we used to go to, San Nicolo in Carcere. I always remember they have a little couple bones. I've always kind of been fascinated by that, or even down in San Crisogno, because people don't know is that many of these underground areas are under churches usually, where that we have access to get to see them. Or else, I mean, it's just, yes, because of layers of time, as you said, that the river itself is flooding. It's a flooding river. Anywhere you can go to stop the flooding, they even ended up building up the barrier walls and finished, after the flood of 1870. That's another explanation for the underground area, was because of the flooding and bringing the silt over. And then imagine what they were finding underground when they were building those walls that are now in the National Archaeological Museum, Palazzo Massimo, Piazza Repubblica, the Villa Giulia, the so-called Villa Giulia, frescoes, the intense, beautiful frescoes. And actually, now that you bring up the
the walls at the Tiber River, because those were only completed in the 1930s, I believe, right? With
Yes.
Under Mussolini. And I now recall, because my kids go to school in the area of Trastevere, where we have colleagues living as well. And right at that point, with the last flooding, or that the water got over the riverbanks, that's where they found this other archaeological site where they found the port of Rome. So where you can still see, it's just small, and when you see it from the bridge, it might not seem to be that. I mean, it doesn't get many enthusiastic to actually go and visit the site, which is for now still locked off. But I found that really, really interesting, that it was always there, and then only one flood, one time that the water really got high tide, and then all of a sudden it's cleared up. So still many of these surprises.
Yeah, exactly. Many times the tendency throughout the Middle Ages, maybe, as you pointed out with Thomas's tour, that he addresses this, but there was a tendency for things to be built within, standing ruins and covering them, encompassing them. In fact, the town outside of Rome, Palestrina, was bombed by the Americans during the Second World War, and the factory was bombed. Well, the factory had been built over the remains of the Temple of the Primigeni, which I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go there. We did have to study, but it's
Sure.
really amazing, and it was like the precursor for inspiration for the Vittoriano monument, among many other things. And I mean, it's just beautiful, and it was unearthed because those buildings were bombed. Also, I think a factory covered the Great Temple of Hercules outside of Tivoli. I mean, that's the amazing thing. I always try to emphasize with people that it permeates throughout the entire city. It's everywhere within the walls of Rome. You dig underneath, you will find ruins everywhere. Where my partner lives is where I'm staying right now during this time period on the Via Dino Compagni, which for me is actually one of the most beautiful roads of Rome. And I'm driving along every day. I get to drive by the umbrella pines, and there's actually cows on the way. It's about 20 minutes outside the center. But there is the catacombs of Saint Alessandro, I believe it's called. It's the catacombs of Saint Alessandro, and so maybe one day I'll have the courage to go knock on the door, because it's not normally open, because there were over 60 catacombs, right?
But something I've never heard of it.
Oh yeah, because if you go to Porta Pia, I think it's Porta Pia. Forgive us, guys, because we don't always go through every information here. Porta Pia, which is the gateway to Nomentana, right? Nearby 20 Settembre. There's a statue of Saint Agnes outside the walls, and I think it's Saint Alessandro. If it's not, I'll write in the notes and correct myself, but I'm pretty sure it's Saint Alessandro. And that's to denote that the fact is that the road would lead you to those two catacombs on those statues. Even that, the whole complex of St. Agnes outside the walls is just truly amazing.
I love the mausoleum there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think I'm going to have a long conversation, because Luca was telling me that he has a great interest of the circular mausoleums, because I talk about them in my Vatican tour. And another thing, which is for me, it's like one of my favorite areas, which is the underground. Did you ever get to do the Scavi tour underneath St. Peter's?
Yes, multiple times. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that for me is like the most beautiful underground tour. The way they set it up, it's like the guides themselves are from the Vatican. They're representing the Vatican, but it's just so beautiful, because as you just go underneath, and you have the frescoes are lit up, and they have nothing to do with the Catholic Church sometimes, because it was an ancient city of the dead. Everywhere we go, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, no, I find it beautiful that they actually offer that tour. The first time I was just completely amazed. I was in silence. You're walking around for an hour and a half. I was so impressed, because then you walked around in that church so many times, and you think, oh yeah, sure, how much is there here underground? And then you see there's a completely different world with all these tombs big enough, even bigger than my apartment in Rome. It's fantastic, and beautiful mosaics there as well. I always find it so interesting to see that there are so many ties to be made, or so many comparisons to be made from the art and religion of the Romans that all permeates into the Catholic Church, which I find fascinating.
I do too. I do too, because I always find that it's a wonderful connection to things that you can discover all the time. Yeah, even then when you're talking about it, there's a famous one for archaeologists because, they do define everything. So in the Scavia, underneath St. Peter's, which is the necropolis of the Vatican, they have one room where I believe they allow you in. You look up at the ceiling and you have a scene of Vendemia, right? It's the babies or the little angels or Bacchus's little helpers who are gathering grapes. And then there's a figure of a man on a chariot who could be Helios, the sun god, or they claim that this is kind of a progression to find that Christians were also being buried in the necropolis. So there's always this connection. Have you also been able to see, because this is something that the Vatican Museums has set up a few years ago under the parking lot that was built in the 1930s in the Vatican City, was a Via Triumphalis.
Yeah.
So have you been to those necropolis?
No, unfortunately, I haven't been able to visit yet.
That is a very interesting place to see. And it's interesting because they set it up in a different way. Normally, we walk down at the level of what has been excavated. Well, this one has a building covering it, so it's no longer underground per se, but you're actually walking on catwalks. And so you see everything from above. And you can even see the mausoleums with the tops that were cut off. And you look inside and you can see the urns. Sometimes the urns still have the remains of people inside them. I remember there was a beautiful one of a statue, like a tiny statue, of a slave falling asleep on a lamp. And that was because he was the guy who was helping his master walk around the city at night. And he had to wait outside while this guy, whoever he was serving, was at someone's house being entertained. That was just such a unique depiction of something. Always a surprise when you see these things in ancient Rome.
But when you're saying that the tops were cut off, because that's interesting, I immediately am thinking, like, why would they do that? Why would they damage such an old thing? Was it done purposefully, or?
No, I think they were already damaged. I think they were already damaged. Lots of times you don't see the tops of these necropoli also because something was built on top of it, and then when they removed everything, then it got damaged. I don't think they did it on purpose.
No, it made me think about another one of those sites that we visit on the underground tour, the house of John and Paul.
Yes.
The Saints John and Paul. And then when we enter there, it was usually one of the questions I would get, like, why don't we have ceilings? So beautiful frescoes on the side walls and no ceilings, which was really just because they were thinking, yeah, let's go and dig and see what's down there, not thinking about that they would be damaging ceilings. So exactly. That's where mostly those tops were gone.
That's an amazing place too, and I find it a challenging place, because we're always constrained with time, and you want to make it clear for people, and you make a clear understanding for them. And I felt like I was getting a better grasp because you could even walk down the street, which was a Roman street, and then you could even see the windows of the Insula, the ancient apartment building, because it was all incorporated later on that the church was built on top of it. Do you have a favorite area in Rome that you like to show people that's underground?
Well, I believe that one of the sites, we usually included this, but as you say, time constraints are usually forcing us to cut parts of the tours that we have in our minds. One of the places I really, really like is Saint Chrysogonus, San Crisogono in Trastevere, which is so beautiful. It's because it's similar to St. Clement's. It's much smaller, of course, and has fewer frescoes that you can still see. It's really only 2 walls, but I always feel that it seems to be like this this ever ongoing excavation.
Yes.
So you walk down there and you see that there are some rubble in a corner, and there are some rocks there, But then you walk around and see beautiful frescoes on the walls. The last time I was there, it was a shame that there was lots of mold on the frescoes. So I was getting worried, like, is no one going to take care of the water gushing in when it rains? But it's still so beautiful. You walk underground in a very large open space.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in the catacombs, the walls are coming towards you. You really cannot be claustrophobic and visit the catacombs.
Exactly.
Same at the Scavi tour. Yes, it's really a large space that you walk through in an hour and a half.
Like close to.
But this place, St. Chrysogonus, it's so big. You walk down there and you believe that you're in another basilica with tall ceilings. You can imagine how the apse was completely finished in frescoes. And of course, especially if you then have seen by then the beautiful apse mosaic of St. Clement's or San Nicola, and then you visit St. Chrysogonus. First, a beautiful basilica on top with even works of the time of Bernini, 1600s. You walk down, you go back to, what is it, the 2nd century?
Yeah.
And then you imagine how there was this other basilica down there. And I believe that's one of the most beautiful places. I believe it was Brendan who showed me that place for the first time.
Oh, was it? There we go.
In awe, trying to decipher what was left of the frescoes already back then. And then you see tombs with bones, seeing these inscriptions in Latin, because that's another thing that you learn, right? Not only are we studying for the exam our frescoes, our statues and museums, but I figured I learned much more of the Latin that I had at school, but that was so long ago. And then you want to read those inscriptions, which is all medieval Latin. Deciphering those is really challenging and exciting at the same time.
You know, I do feel that I agree. San Cristogono is an amazing place because it almost seems that no one goes. So when you go down there with people,
you're just alone. It's only you.
Alone. You feel like you're like Indiana Jones going down. I also remember sometimes the priest would forget you're down there and turn off the light, which is also exciting. But you know, this happened to me once or twice. But it is a beautiful, vast space, and then it kind of has that kind of feeling of mystery. Yeah, you don't hear any noise. You hear silence, and you can kind of use your imaginations and maybe hear different things. Maybe some kind of Gregorian chant going on in this place of the faithful. You know, it's always like that's great. Also, when it's connected to the catacombs.
Which it actually happens, right? When you're then entering the church. It was always Father Venanzio, who was a priest there. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he, I would always feel a bit as if it was intruding, because usually by the time we would get to the church, they're already serving mass, and they're really fine. They go like, yeah, sure, come on. And then you have to go to the back of the church. You go through one door, a second door, leave your little offering in a basket, and then go downstairs. Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, sure, we won't forget you. And then you walk down that big staircase, and then in order to get to the other side of the excavation, you walk over 2 more staircases, going up, going down, going up, going down, and then you're to the other side.
Yep.
And you actually hear the sounds of the streets. But as you can't see the modern day streets, I always imagine like, oh yeah, that was how it really was back then. You see apartments around you, an entrance to a house and another one, and you imagine kids playing around. And you really feel transported back in time with the sounds of modern day. Yeah, and then you walk back, and then if you're lucky enough to hear those chants from the upper church while they're serving mass, then you're really.
It gives a sense of atmosphere to it. Now, this is an interesting thing. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you about this, but I was very fortunate to be invited to your wedding. Now, this wedding actually took place in a very special church that's also not often open to the public, and it was a rotonda. It was a circular church, and it was actually lower down, not underground, but the street.
San Teodoro.
San Teodoro. And can I ask you something? Because if you guys, I went there with Thomas, who is another one of our guides, and it was a very beautiful ceremony. It was Tatiana's daughter, Masha, that you married. It was Russian Orthodox, the ceremony?
Yeah, correct.
Yes. So are you still friends with your three witnesses? Because didn't you have three and she had three? And this is why I'm going to ask you guys, because they had to hold heavy crowns over Mario and Masha's heads during the ceremony.
Yeah,
And
very much. Well, I do figure that you have to invite three people to your wedding, three witnesses, because you never know if someone drops during the service. The service takes a long time. They're allowed to switch, so they alternate. So it's one after another holding.
Yeah, I know.
For those who know Orthodox weddings, they would know.
They were ready for it. I mean, do they have to prepare? Because I kept thinking, I was like, my God, this must be so heavy. I was holding a gimbal stick. You'll be very proud. I actually, because I was trying, because we're going to do like 4K video. I walked through Rome for 2.5 hours to the center with a gimbal stick. And like after 20 minutes, I was like, this is really heavy.
It is heavy after a while, yeah.
So yeah, that's what I was going to say. Maybe they were prepared. So they knew what they were doing when they agreed to hold up the grounds.
Well, yeah, we prepared them. In writing.
Well, Mario, before I finish up, because what we always do with the podcast is we ask for you to suggest a travel tip, something as for your experience also traveling a lot through Europe. What would you recommend for people to, when they're coming to Rome? Federica had recommended what time of year. Caterina said expect the unexpected, and Thomas said prepare to be regimented with your time, and also be prepared to allow yourself to have to do nothing. What would you think from your experience? What could you recommend to people with a travel tip?
Well, I usually say it would be something that is in the same line of thought as Thomas. Be prepared to do nothing. I would say go to the beaches, try and visit something that's outside of Rome. Either you like the beach, or you like the mountains, or you like the lakes. We have it all. And that I find always so fascinating about Rome. Every summer we try to get out to Lake Bracciano. And even around the lakes, there's so much art and culture and the beauty of nature to see. Same thing for the mountains, same thing for the seaside. So don't think of Rome as a place where you're only stuck in between buildings and excavations, churches, and underground sites. Of course, you're spending all your time there, but really plan for something outside, which we do as well. We do tours even outside of Rome. But I figured that's something people don't think about so often when they come to Rome.
You're absolutely right. And I think people kind of crave for something, maybe sometimes to get away from the crowds, but they also enjoy being to places. I mean, this is where sometimes where Italians will go to the Lago Bracciano or some of the other lovely lakes around. Grayson and her husband, Stefano, took me to a wonderful lake that's right next to it, Lago Albano. And I mean, they're
sure, the Castelli Romani. Yeah,
sure. The Castelli Romani. Yeah, exactly. But you're, in a way, you get to spend time with how the Italians, the Romans, what they do, where they go and relax. And there is an immense amount of natural beauty all around. Italy, of course, the way it is rather unique geographically. But I mean, also Lazio. I mean, we had to study a lot of that stuff. I mean, it is quite beautiful.
Precisely. And not only because we studied it, we know, of course, there's tons of art and stuff and sites to visit. It's just really the idea that you can get out in half an hour, you are already at those beautiful sites.
Yes.
Like in half an hour, you're at the beach. In half an hour, you're at the lake. Okay, it takes you an hour to get to the mountains. But even that, it's just to be out, to see something different. And then to imagine that even in Roman antiquity, people would do the same.
Yep.
Not for nothing that all these emperors would build their villas in these beautiful places. Nero, who lived and built his palace at the beach of Anzio Nettuno, which then still today are busy beaches.
you
can help me out with other
important
sites. I mean, Tivoli,
Santa Severo. There's tons of them.
No, but the same thing if you go out and think about Hadrian in Tivoli. It's an hour, right, to get out there.
Not even 45 minutes probably to get out to Hadrian's Villa.
And then even if you say like, well, we don't want to stay there, I always say try to come to Rome for at least a week and then add a couple of more days somewhere else outside of Rome. If you don't want to stay over, you can go and hop on a train or rent a car and get there in a day and then get back and then enjoy your gelato in the piazzas of Rome.
Of course. I mean, it's great because you can come to Rome or Italy for the first time and get a taste of it. And then, you find that so many people fall in love with it. They come back again. You're always going to see something new. You can see things over again, but you can do that. There's like a whole experience of getting outside the city. And we are going to be doing a whole series of, within our destination, we've done 3 videos now, 3 or 4 that are taking place outside of the Rome Center.
Can't wait to watch those videos, Rob.
Yes. Well, Mario, as always, it's a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for giving me time. I look forward to having you back again for the podcasts. And we'll be seeing you on our T-Walks Live.
Yes, I promise that there will be one coming up very soon.
Yes. Ciao, Mario.
See you around. Bye.
Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.